Hey, 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 Scotty, we got balls live on Friday. What's going on, buddy?
Welcome,
Hello,
gentlemen.
everybody. Glad you guys are here. We got on right at the last minute, so hope you're joining us. Hope you're tuning in to this episode of We Got Balls. And, it's been an interesting week on We Got Balls. We had an episode on Wednesday called Why Am I Gay? And man, did that episode have a lot of interaction, have a lot of dynamics that were really getting guys heated, both in the sense of comments towards us, but also in their own exploration of their own story. And so, what we wanted to do on this Friday episode is we just want to continue the conversation. So, if you're there watching this right now, feel free to engage in the chat and welcome Kevin. We're glad you're here. Cup of Copper, glad you're here. William Webb, glad you're here. Cambo, Holistic Healing, glad you're here. Daniel Tillman, Tony McCrae, Alan, and R. Smith, glad all you guys are here. We are checking in on this duo episode, this repeat episode of what does it mean to talk about being gay. We're going to call this episode "Am I Gay?" Not "Why Am I Gay?" because we already had that question as the title for the episode on Wednesday. So the question for you, Scott, and for me is, am I gay? Are you gay? That's where we're going to
Okay,
start.
so I answered that at the last part of that episode on Wednesday, so I can
Well,
answer it
tell
again.
tell us again to give us a refresher. How would you describe yourself as a man when it comes to this question of sexual orientation?
Yeah, so first I describe myself, I identify as a man, and I am attracted to a woman, my wife, and I'm also attracted to men that meet my arousal structure, which is, specific to a number of different qualities that come from my story and from my experiences growing up. So I don't identify in any other way other than that. And we got some pushback on that from guys who see that as disingenuous, maybe on the softer side, or just plain out lying and in denial, or in denial on the hard line side. And they're absolutely entitled to their opinion. I'm not in denial. I'm actually here admitting what I'm attracted to. So
Yeah.
if I was in denial, I would be suppressing that, or I would be repressing it. Suppressing is intentionally pushing it down. Repressing is unconsciously. I'm not unconscious about my attraction to men. I am consciously aware of it, but I'm also not. I don't use that. I don't use that to seek out pornography that feeds that arousal structure. I don't engage in sexual interactions with other men, and not that I haven't at times in the past, but that's not what I'm doing now. I'm trying to both honor my desire and be curious about where is this desire to connect with men sexually? How did that start in my life? Where did that come from? And then how do I honor the goodness of the longings that are beneath the sexual kind of veneer? Because I think what it's really about is wanting deep, meaningful, vulnerable, intimate relationships with other guys. My understanding of, or my way of making meaning about that is it came from a very disruptive relationship with my dad growing up, and maybe some other boys younger in my life. But I've always had lots of male friends. I've never had problems making friends with, kind of the prototypical straight guy, but definitely had those sexual desires there. And for me, it's come down to, longing for connection and belonging and feeling like one of the guys and feeling accepted. And so I honor those longings, but I'm also wanting to point my life in a direction that represents the best version of me, which being a married man with a family and coaching guys in their sexual struggles means that I'm not engaging actually in having sexual relationships with other men. So that's a big long answer, but I think it
Yeah, it's a
deserves.
long answer. You gave us the encyclopedia answer of that question for you, but it's good. And I'm going to answer that
Well, it's
question at
not.
the end of
It's
the
not
episode.
a. I don't think it's a simple question. Is the point?
Fair enough. And I'm going to answer that question for myself at the end of the episode. So if you want to stick around and give the answer that hear the answer that I would give, stick around till the 45-minute or so mark, and I will be glad to share that with you. So tease that it's a tease if you want, but I'm trying to keep you guys engaged in the conversation. So the other question that I think we landed on at the end of last week's episode is, how do I know, or how can I discover about my orientation or my arousal or my attraction to other guys? And we talked about doing story work, and that's one of the things that we are, Scott. We are trauma-informed story coaches who help guys who are trying to figure out what's going on in their life and engage in a deeper understanding of what you just said. You could not have described those things about your life and about your story that you just did had you not gone through the work yourself of knowing your own story. Would that be correct?
That's correct, because when I was a teenager, I did identify as gay. So I was kind of a forerunner for like coming out. It wasn't even called coming out. I grew up in the later part of the 70s as a teenager. I graduated in 1980. I lived in a small town in Iowa, and I started telling my closest friends that I was gay when I was a senior in high school. So in this small little town in western Iowa. So that took some balls, don't you think?
I think so.
And
you're never a man that's short on boldness. I can tell you that.
yeah,
That's what I love about you. Yeah.
To me, it was about having integrity and being honest about who I was. So, but I had a experience with Jesus, a real life experience with him, when I was 17, in the midst of kind of that coming out. And then I decided that, you know what, I'm really wanting to follow Jesus more than I'm wanting to pursue my sexual desires. And so it kind of interrupted what my plans were. I was planning to go. I was good in theater and a good actor. My plan was to go, get a theater degree, and then go either to Broadway or Hollywood, become a famous star, and have a lot of gay sex. And then Jesus
That was the plan. Okay, all right.
Honestly,
Greg Ellis, big super chat. Thanks, Greg, for your support. Glad you guys are here. Thank you, everybody, for being in the chat. So, Scott, when you have this plan, and so what derailed that identity of being for you a gay superstar on Hollywood? I mean, on Broadway.
Yeah.
How did you get out of that?
So, the guy that led the Bible study where I came to Christ actually struggle with his sexuality too. And so he was open to it. And I also realized prior to that time, I didn't think you could follow Jesus and struggle with, I thought you had to be perfect. I thought you had to have all your shit together. And so he kind of showed me that, no, you can, like, you're a human being, man. You've got things that you struggle with. You've got things that you feel conflicted with internally. And, that's our lives. And I think the Bible's really honest about that. If you read Romans 7, Paul talks about this inner struggle he has with, I don't want to do the things I do, I don't want to do, and the things I want to do, I don't do. And that seems to be like, that described my internal struggle with my sexuality. So I realized.
Okay, so hold on, time out. You said the word struggle 5 times in the last minute. So we got to get this clear. That this comes up time and time again when we talk about this in the dynamics of talking about sexual orientation and about being gay or straight. Is you use the word struggle. Now, not everybody in our audience is going to use that word struggle, because there's a paradigm that you're coming out of that explains why this is or is not a struggle. So
but I'm allowed to use that word, aren't I?
You're allowed to use that word, but I want to get some clarity there, because that's part of when guys are listening to us, they may or may not have had that same background to see their orientation, their sexual arousal template as being a struggle or not. So I just want to get some clarity there.
Okay, so look, go back to something we said on Wednesday, which is, I think it's necessary to respect the autonomy of each individual and the choices that they want to make in their life. So I personally did not feel like my attraction to men was a it wasn't a choice that I remember ever making in my life. I don't think it's a choice for most people. I can't see anybody sitting around going, heterosexual, homosexual. I think I'll pick the homosexual version. I don't think people do that. I think we just, as we're developing, we discover attraction and desire naturally. And then if it's inconsistent with our values or who we want to be or our relationships, then there is this inner battle that occurs. Now, that could be with same-sex attraction, but it could also be with drinking. It could
Yes.
be with wanting to take drugs. It could be with procrastination. It could be with a tendency to be a perfectionist. And I see a lot of these things, including my attraction to the same sex, as an adaptation that was a natural consequence of the experience that I had growing up. So, in one sense, we talk about Oprah and Bruce Perry's book, What Happened to You? What happened to you is a really beautiful question. Because instead of asking, why are you gay, which sounds like an accusation, you can ask the question, why are you attracted? What happened to you that made you attracted to the same sex? What do you believe? Now, my personal opinion is I'm allowed to have a sense of agency in that and not buy into any kind of narrative that is out there that doesn't have a lot of scientific proof. So my decision was I looked at all the reasons for what psychologists and biologists and human evolutionists and all that said about where homosexuality comes from. And my decision was there wasn't a lot of good evidence that it's kind of a nature thing. I thought it was more of a nurture thing. And that gave me the possibility of thinking about, well, what do I do with this then? If it's coming out of my background, if it's coming out of my experiences and my story, then I can make adjustments in that. I'm not destined for something, right?
Yeah, right,
And
right.
to me, that's the point that I really want to stress is I don't believe even preconditions or a propensity to something means destiny. I don't believe that I am determined to do certain things unless I choose to be that way, unless I choose to do those things. So what I'm leaning for here is a sense of agency and the ability to choose who we want to be as people. And I don't think anybody here would disagree with that. If
And
you
I would,
do,
well, I would not disagree with it. I would take a different point. And so this is just giving some clarity about how we see this individually. That's your perspective. My perspective, obviously, is coming from a different side, which I will be glad to explain exactly whether or not I'm gay at the end of the episode. So stick around for that. Smash that like button to help us promote this on YouTube. If you want to continue in this conversation and invite others to do the same, is that just because there's a propensity towards attraction or towards a behavior, as you described it, doesn't mean it has to be a struggle. At some point in one's life, a person can say, listen, this is who I want to be. I'm not going to struggle anymore. I'm going to make peace with this. I'm tired of trying to go a different direction than the way that I was raised, because sometimes it's a value system that we were raised in. So if I don't want to use any particular value system because I don't want to put anybody on blast. But if you're raised in a particular value system that you, at a later point in life, say, I don't think that value system was the most worthwhile thing for me, and I want to be in a different place in my life, then you don't struggle anymore.
but you're making my point that that's a personal autonomous decision,
Oh,
right?
I'm not saying that, but that language of struggle, I think, is important to say that it doesn't have to be a struggle in your life. It only is a struggle if, and I'm trying to remember, PC1 said this very well. He said, I'm gay myself and a Christian. I don't think God wants me to have sexual relationships with other men. That's his belief.
Well, Charlie says it's a struggle if it's unwanted.
And that's care. And that's that word unwanted and that dynamic around what is it in my arousal structure do I want to accept and say, this is who I am, these are my values, and what is it in my arousal structure that I say, I'm at odds with this. I don't agree with that. And so now I have this internal dynamic, but what PC1 says, such is life. There are struggles there, when the verse in Romans says, the things I don't want to do, I do anyways. And the things I don't want to do, and the things I do, I don't do. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about that real tension in life from our ideals and my behaviors to line up. And
That's the
so
human condition.
it
Like
is the human
everybody
condition.
has that condition, right? And
Yes.
so there's a lot of unwanted behaviors, not just sexual, but sexual behaviors can be unwanted too.
Yes.
So our whole practice is built on helping guys look at their unwanted sexual behaviors, whatever they may be, and be curious about when those entered into my life, how they serve me, and if they're currently serving me in the direction where I want to head with my life. Now, that I don't see how that is wrong or offensive to anybody.
I never said wrong. Never said it.
Right.
But I think it is a dynamic that we have to acknowledge, that when we're having these conversations, that's vocabulary that gets introduced. That's where the internal tension that you mentioned all human beings struggle with, and I agree with all human beings struggle with this, lives. So when we say struggle, we're not talking about good versus bad. We're talking about value systems that are going on inside of us that we're trying to bring into an alignment to find integration and integrity. Yes?
I'm not being to be a contrary ass today, but it's impossible to have a value system without some kind of standard of this is healthy, this is unhealthy, this is flourishing, this is not. Because I don't know what values are based on other than some kind of system by which you evaluate this is what is good for me and this is what is not productive for me. So whatever the terms are, when you talk about values, you're talking about internal desires that supersede just kind of my natural tendency to go in a direction, I think, right? So I might have a desire to eat a bag of chocolate chip cookies, Chris.
Yes, you might. I love that desire, by the way. I would be all in favor. That's a value I could hold with you.
But I also have a desire to not gain significant amounts of body fat.
Yeah, that's true. That's contradictory desires right there.
Okay, so I have a value system that I value my health and my physical appearance more than I value the deliciousness of the cookies. Now, here's where I'm going to agree with you on categorizing things as good and bad. I don't think those categories tend to help us change our behavior as much as saying eating the cookies is not a bad choice, but it's not my optimal choice because it doesn't serve me in the holistic areas in which I want to be a flourishing individual. So it doesn't help me to shame myself or punish myself or hate myself if I eat a bag of cookies. What I can do is be curious about what was it about yesterday that drove me to eat that entire bag of cookies and be curious about that. Oh, you know what? I noticed that I do this every time I'm really stressed out when my boss yells at me. Maybe there's a relationship to my story as a child. What happened? I yelled at by my parents. Oh, I know. I used to go and sneak a bag of cookies up to my room and eat them while I listened to Donna Summers and the Ohio Players.
Okay, so that is something that supersedes your values. It's an attachment that you have in your story. These Donna Summers.
It was a survival. It was a way I survived intense emotions as a boy growing up. So, yeah, if I'm going to get away from that behavior and pursue the direction I want to go, I have to honor that particular way of surviving. And that may seem ironic then. So if I'm attracted to the same sex, actually, I've had to accept that in me and honor that and understand how that served a purpose in my life. If that's something that I don't want to continue to engage in physically with other people, to honor so it's more important for me to honor my relationship with my wife, my family, and the guys that I'm serving than to go pursue that sexual desire.
So would it be accurate to say that when you say the word struggle, you're talking about your internal struggle with conflicting values?
Conflicting desires.
Conflicting desires. Okay. So, because in one sense, your value of going and having sex with other men is pretty black and white. I don't want to do this. This is something that I don't want to do. I've pretty much established in my life this is not something that I'm going to pursue. It's not going to be helpful for me, right?
Right.
On the other hand, you get stuck in a loop where your desires say, but this is the best way to take care of yourself right now. This is the place where you feel the most connected. This is the place where you come alive. This is the place where your body has connected most deeply with making sure that you feel cared for. And so your value conflicts with your desire, and that's where the storm happens. That's where the struggle happens. True?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about struggles. We're not talking about ideological struggles. We're talking about internal narrative struggles of the things that I believe to be most helpful or not. I personally like the word helpful more than good or bad, because I think good, bad leads to shame and leads back into the same cycles of survival strategies. But the most helpful thing for me may not be the thing that I want to do right now. But the thing I want to do right now might be something that may take me down a dark road, which conflicts with the things that I believe are going to bring health and life and vitality long-term in my life. So I just want to get that clear. We're probably going to come back and have this discussion 10 more times, but we get a lot of conversation and the chat is on fire, dude. It is like been lighting up left and right. So as we've been talking about this, and thank you for everything that you guys have contributed. Smash that like button, and I'm going to answer the question about am I gay at the end of this live in just about 20, 25 minutes. So stick around and ask any questions that you may have. We're going to do our best to get to them. We've got a ton of questions from our conversation on Wednesday that we want to get to. And the first question that I want to bring about is being gay or straight more a product of my genetics / epigenetics, or is it how I respond to my environment?
So I just listened to a great podcast, Justin Lee Miller. What was that called, Chris? I sent it to you. I can't remember the
I'll look it up.
The name.
Anyways, keep talking.
Yeah. So Justin Lee Miller is a Kinsey Institute fellow. He's a professor. He's written a book called Tell Me What You Want, which is on sexual desire and fantasy. And he's got a great podcast. So he had a biologist on yesterday talking about sexual orientation. And they got into this. Is it biological based? Is it genetic? And there's not a lot of coherence on that. There's not a lot of research on that that's been validated. There is no one genetic marker for sexual orientation. That's what they basically agreed to. There are lots of factors that go into our sexuality, which I think we've been saying all along too. It's a very complex issue. So again, and I'm not putting words in their mouth. This is what they said. And these guys are not coming from a religious perspective at all, that there may be genetic factors that predispose somebody to that. But again, predisposition is not determined. That doesn't mean you're determined to develop a sexual orientation because of a genetic predisposition. And one of the most famous studies on this has been twin studies. So they take identical twins who share the same genetic components, and they look at what is the propensity if one twin is gay for the other twin to be gay. Now, if there was a genetic propensity to same-sex attraction, you would have a propensity of the other twin be over 50%, and it's not.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah.
Right. So in the twin studies that have been done and validated numerous times with other follow-up studies, identical twins do not show if one is homosexual or one is gay, the other one doesn't have any greater than a 50% chance of being gay as well. So again, it's showing that there's a lot of complexity that even if there are genetic factors that would predispose somebody for that, you can't get rid of the environmental factors. And this is true even when you look at twins from just how they function and how they develop. Sometimes one twin will be bigger than the other. Sometimes one twin will have a completely different personality than the other, but they're genetically identical. How is that possible? Well, because they're treated different by their parents, right? They have different
life experiences and dynamics that happen to them in their story.
Now, that's where epigenetics could play a role. So epigenetics is not genetics. Epigenetics is how gene expression gets turned on or off due to environmental stress. So that can happen in the womb, it can happen right after birth, it can happen throughout life. And the most famous studies on this have been done with Jews that were in the Holocaust. And for 3 and 4 generations, for Holocaust survivors, their what do we call it? The children of the children of the children
Yeah, the
will
descendants.
show an environmental sensitivity to stress, because obviously the great grandparents endured tremendous duress and stress while they were interred in concentration camps. That gets passed on epigenetically through the male's sperm and the female's egg. So the epigenetics means above. The things that are above genetics, the coding for how things get turned on and off is impacted by environmental stress. African Americans or Black families are subject to this as well, because 4 generations ago, they were suffering slavery. They've suffered racism. They've suffered bigotry for years, and the effects of segregation in this country. That gets passed down because that's a stressor. So there are instances where you can see that somebody might have a propensity to have those genetic switches that might make them maybe more feminine, less gender normative, that might make them more prone to identifying with a particular sexual orientation. But again, these are not determinants. They're not destiny. So we're not depriving people of their own sense of agency. But again, I think the greater factors are what happens in a person's upbringing. What are the experiences they have with their mother and their father? What are their experiences of sexual abuse and so on?
The name of the podcast is What Determines Your Sexual Orientation by the Sex and Psychology podcast.
Sex and Psychology.
Sex
Great,
and Psychology
great podcast on sex if you want great information.
Yep.
From a really good researcher. So
another question from our Wednesday conversation is, can arousal structures change over time? And I would say absolutely yes, it does.
And how do you know that?
I know that because my personal arousal structures are different from when I started looking at what turned me on at 18, 19 years old versus what turns me on in my 40s. Some of that is out of novelty in my journey into porn and exploring the world of pornography. There's different things that I was introduced to that were really exciting and that I'd never even thought of before as being arousing to me, that became arousing to me. One of the bigger thing was, I don't know if I've ever talked about this, when transgender porn started being really pushed, probably about 10, 12 years ago. I was like, wow, this is great. This is an amazing thing. And it wasn't anything that I ever thought about turning me on, but I did for a season. And now that season's passed and I'm not there anymore, but different guys have different dynamics. But also when you uncover different aspects of your story, you begin to be aroused by different things, because arousal structures are nothing more than a code, a clue into what in your story are you still wrestling with. And that was me. So, and I've seen that with guys over and over and over again as they begin to do their story work and uncover their own arousal dynamics.
Yeah, well, so arousal structures are formed pretty early in life, between 5 and 8 years of age. I've heard some researchers say they emerge out of your relationship with your mother and your father. So let's just think about it this way, because this is what we actually know about neurobiology and attachment and affect regulation, which are kind of founding principles of how we form as human beings. As you are developing as a child in the first 2 years of your life, there are mental models or schemas that are forming in your mind as to what is a human being, what is a male, and what is a female. And so there is a stage of just identity formation, and then there's a stage of gender identity formation, and then there's a stage of sexual formation, which typically doesn't occur until the sex hormones of puberty kick in. So how do you understand that you are different from your mother? Because when you're born, you are in a symbiotic relationship. You come out of your mother's body, and from a felt experience perspective, you don't differentiate yourself from your mother. You view yourself and again, this is all before language is occurring, but from a
Right.
felt sense, a baby feels like they belong to their mother, that their mother is a part of them and they're a part of their mother. At around 18 months, they begin this process of separation and
Individuation.
individuation.
Yep.
All children do. So, and the classic experiment for this is if you put a red dot on a child's forehead before they're 14 months of age and put them in front of a mirror, they will go up to the image in the mirror and try to touch the child because they think that other child is another child. They don't realize that's their reflection.
Right. I think that's
At around,
just this other kid that's got a red dot on its head.
yeah, so that's called mentalization. I cannot conceive of another person in the reflection of a mirror. I think that is a different person than me. I cannot conceive that's me. At 14 months of age, I begin to develop the mentalizing capability of understanding, oh, that dot is on my forehead. I'm a me. And at the same time, I start to separate from this symbiotic relationship with my mother and begin to see myself as a self, and my mother as a separate self, and my dad as a separate self. And then I begin to notice there are two kinds of adults. There's dad and there's mom. And this is where gender identity starts to kick in, is what kind of adult, what kind of person am I? Am I more like mom or am I more like dad? Okay. So gender identity
how
is,
does that gender role play into arousal structure? I'm trying to follow into that. I know we went way back into this narrative, but
okay.
give me the cliff notes.
So arousal is driven by a lack of familiarity. We are aroused by things that are unfamiliar to us,
okay,
which is the novelty factor, right?
Okay. Yep.
So one of the core components of driving sexual arousal is novelty. I am drawn to novel things. So if I do not separate from my mother as a boy, I don't individuate, but I'm overly attached to her, then femininity becomes too familiar to me to be a source of arousal. And so my arousal structure is going to form towards what is unfamiliar. So the other part of gender development is, and we talked about how boys and girls are different in this sense, boys have an additional developmental milestone that they have to achieve. And that is, boys have to not only separate from their mother to individuate, they also have to disidentify from their mother's gender and identify with their father's gender. And this is where dads become really important.
Or another male figure, right?
Another male figure.
Yeah.
Girls do not have that milestone. And some researchers have said this is probably the explanation for why there are 4 times as many gay men in the world as there are lesbians. So homosexuality is not evenly distributed between males and females. There are 4 times as many gay men as there are lesbians in the world. Why would that be? And researchers have basically hypothesized that, well, because girls don't have to disidentify from their mother to own their gender identity. They just have to separate and individuate. Boys have to reject the gender of their mother and then attach to the gender of their father to be completed in their masculine identity formation. And if there is, this can go wrong in a couple ways. The mother doesn't allow the little boy to unattach, so she's very enmeshed with him and requires a lot of him emotionally. So she parentifies the boy and he becomes a soothing source for her emotions, or she's overprotective and she doesn't allow, or she hates men. I've heard all of these things.
Yep.
And I've heard lots of mothers who have disparaged the boy's father in front of him. And so the boy begins to hate his father because he doesn't want to identify with his dad when his mother is overly involved and then disparaging men. So this can be very, very complex. But in general, the boy doesn't disidentify with the mother. And then the other area where the wounding can occur is the boy doesn't identify with his father. He doesn't find his father a salient figure to bond to. And salient means good and strong.
Worthy, helpful,
worthy.
Yeah.
And
so does it change over time, though?
This,
that's the question. My answer would
be
be yes. Does that change over time? Because you have your initial arousal structure that comes out of your relationship with your mother and father and your childhood dynamics. Could later in life you have a different arousal dynamic? Super chat from Longhorn, by the way.
Yay! But arousal structures change for everybody all the time. Like, go back to your transgender porn thing, right?
Yep.
Transgender porn wasn't really a thing 50 years ago
No,
because you didn't have guys that could present as a chick with a dick. So pornographers, and by the way, this is all in A Billion Wicked Thoughts, which is an excellent book on arousal and what people are turned on by. But they will tell you in that book that the only kind of men who watch transgender porn or a chick with a dick is a straight guy. Like, that is not attractive to gay men at all.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it's not is because gay men are attracted to masculinity. And there's nothing masculine about a man that presents himself as a female on top and has a penis on the bottom.
Yep.
That's not appealing to most gay men. It is appealing to straight men. And there are various reasons for that.
Clues.
But yeah, so it's but your arousal structures can change all the time. It depends on what you're doing to condition yourself. So this is known as conditioning, right? You can become aroused by an object, which is what a fetish is.
Yep.
If you have a sexual experience, an orgasm in the context where the object is present, maybe it's part of the sexual experience, and you end up having an attachment to the object. So this is where people develop, kind of fetishes around feet. They can develop fetishes around women in high heels. You weren't born with that. That forms, right?
It's true. So an associated questions: can watching Mary Poppins at 5 years old make me gay?
Absolutely. In fact, no.
Yeah,
there's several studies. No,
several studies on men forced to watch Mary Poppins repetitively that turned out that absolutely affected their arousal structure. So, well, in about 5 minutes or less, because we're getting close to the end of our time. Here's the question: where does abuse play a role in this conversation around sexual identity, sexual orientation?
Okay. It is very well documented in the research literature that people that are gay or bisexual or lesbian identified, and I believe it's true for transgender, have insecure attachment at a much higher rate than heterosexuals.
So let me be clear, at a much higher rate than people who identify as straight.
That's right.
That's what you're saying. Okay.
So there is a factor that and insecure attachment is also known as developmental trauma, because it is a trauma in the relationship with mother and father. So traumatic attachment wounds are a large part. Now, is that correlation or causation? That's very difficult to determine in the social sciences unless you can actually go in and see brain structures in operation, which they're getting to with fMRIs. But there is a higher degree of attachment injury in people that are non-heterosexual identified. Second of all, there is a larger degree of sexual abuse among GBLT people as well. Again, sexual abuse in this paper that I found, which was a great, I think it was a research proposal written by a doctoral candidate at the University of Texas. There's a lot, he brought up a lot of really interesting factors why it's hard to really get at this, because there are some people that say that children, if they enjoy the sexual experience, that's not sexual abuse. I completely disagree with that.
I agree with that. Right? Disagree with that too, yeah.
But you see, the difficulty that researchers have is with different terminology. Well, what is sexual abuse? Is it sexual abuse for a boy to be exposed to pornography when he's 5 years of age? I think it is. We work with guys who are exposed to pornography very early, and they trace their sexual struggles back to that early exposure to porn, even though they would tell you they enjoyed it.
One of the stories I hear often is I go into the bathroom and there's someone who engages me sexually and I really enjoy it. And it's the first time I've been touched by another man in a way that feels pleasurable. And so that, in my mind, is sexual abuse, because you're being preyed on by another person in a public restroom. And yet they don't see it as that. They see it as just their first sexual experience.
Yeah. Well, and that is why we have laws that prohibit adults from having sex with children, because we
Yeah.
know intuitively that there is a power dynamic at play in that kind of relationship,
Mhm.
where a child who is not sexual per se, they're not engaging in sexuality, where a child cannot have the sense of agency that an adult has in a sexual experience. And so power dynamics have to be considered. And a power dynamic can be, my abuser when I was 5 was only 7 years old. Typically, when they do the adverse childhood experiences score, or when they do other research on sexual abuse, they ask you, did somebody 5 years or older ever touch your genitals, or ask you to touch theirs, and so on. But my abuser was only 2 years of age. And if you would have asked me before I started
2
engaging my
years
story,
older than you were at the time.
he
Yeah.
was 2 years older than me.
Yeah.
But if you would have asked me, was I sexually abused? I would have said no, because I never
Sure.
saw that incident as sexual abuse until I started telling that story to other men, and they started asking me, "Wait, why is he asking you to have anal sex and he's only 7?" And he uses the term "but," F-U-C-K. So
Yeah.
where is he getting that word from? And starting to realize he had to be abused by somebody, or he had to be shown that by somebody to bring that to me. And so even though he's my peer, he's sexually more sophisticated than I am. That's a power dynamic,
Mhm.
right?
It is.
So,
And so that's
so
the label that we have to lay over this. When we're talking about sexual abuse, we're really talking about as the power dynamic between someone who knows what they're doing and someone who doesn't know what they're doing been initiated. And if that is the case, then the answer would be there's probably going to be some correlation between that and some dynamic around sexual arousal, sexual orientation.
yeah, let me hold on.
Well, let me talk for a second while you're looking something
Go
up.
ahead.
So,
You talk on me.
so that's and this is something we'll probably come back to on future episodes, because again, we just want everybody to have the understanding that they need to have around what does it mean for someone to develop their sexuality in a safe dynamic. And if you don't have safety as you're developing your sexuality, whether that's through neglect or through abuse, and I want to highlight this, there's many people that I talk to where their sexuality was harmed not because they were too experienced, it's because they weren't experienced enough. They didn't have a safe person to give them a guide into how to become a sexual person. And so that void, that vacancy created this huge well of shame. And so now any experience that they come into sexually is arousing to the point where they think this is the thing that makes me come alive. And this is what I've been looking for my whole life, just because they've had nothing.
Absolutely. And which is why in our work, we're always engaging the family of origin trauma, or the
Yes.
developmental or the attachment trauma, before we go into sexual trauma, because the tendency will be, when you start engaging your sexual story, the tendency will be to turn against yourself because
Yes.
you felt complicit. And I'm going to read from Adam Young's book on this really quickly here. Dan Allender points out that in the book, The Wounded Heart. So somebody was asking me about books. I'll give you a list of books at the end that I recommend on these various subjects. But sexual abuse comes in 2 forms: sexual contact and sexual interactions. Contact refers to touch. Interactions don't involve touch. So here's some example of sexual interactions that can be abusive. One of your parents walked around the house naked or in their underwear. Your father made comments about your developing body in your presence, or your mother says, "Gee, you have a big bulge in the front of your pants, Scott." Your mother told you about her marital frustrations with your father, sometimes even mentioning her sexual disappointment. Your father left pornographic magazines where you could find them, or grandma has a porn channel running in the basement TV. So the primary damage from sexual abuse can be described in this one word: complicity.
Yes.
What does complicity mean? Complicity means that I felt involved in wrongdoing. And, Adam says, I'm in no way saying that your abuse was your fault. However, the hard truth needs to be named. The goal of evil in our sexual abuse is to torment us with the awareness that our own complicity in the midst of that horror is existing. Indeed, shame takes root in our hearts through the body-based knowledge that we were complicit in our own sexual abuse. And he gives 4 reasons why we feel complicit. But the but it all ends in this: when you're abused, you experience some form of arousal.
Yep.
And
And that
you will
links
feel,
you into that shame cycle, right?
yes, and
Because
you
you get
will
turned
feel,
on and because you feel complicit, you feel like it's my responsibility. And
I
I'm bad.
got aroused, I participated in my own abuse, I liked it. And this
Yep.
is why, and for men, this is extremely prominent because female arousal is not obvious and male arousal is obvious. If you
Yes.
have an erection, you can't hide it from another person if you're naked
Yeah.
or if your pants are down. And so there are so many guys that have sexual experiences with another guy, right? The number one abuser of men growing up is other men.
Yes.
It's not women. And when you have an erection with another man, the tendency then is to feel complicit. I wanted it. I enjoyed it. I liked it because it felt good. And so therefore, maybe I'm gay. And that does happen in a lot of people's lives.
Yep. And that's their first experience, so it imprints. And so now you got this narrative in your mind and your body about who you are, which is really hard to disentangle yourself from.
And PC1 says a 5-year-old is not complicit. We
Yes,
completely agree with you, but hear this. He believes he is.
he does.
And it's his belief, his embodied experience of being aroused in the abuse that makes him feel like he wanted it. He enjoyed it. He had some measure of pleasure. And
And that's
in
yeah,
many cases, you keep going back to the abuser. Why do
yes.
you keep going back to the abuser?
Because it feels like home. It feels like a place of belonging.
Because I got more attention from my abuser than I did from my mom and dad.
Yes. And
And
even though it
so
feels bad, it feels also good. And that's where the struggle, the conflict begins in one's life. So again, when we're talking about struggle and conflict, we're talking about these types of splits of desire and value, of identity and belonging that come over and over and over again, and we can't make sense of them apart from telling the story.
that's right. And the word split is very important because one of the effects of trauma is a fragmentation that occurs in our thinking, in our minds, as well as it can be a split in our personality. We can develop two different senses of self, one that holds all the trauma of that experience and one that just puts it out of our mind.
Yep.
And so trauma splitting is a result of trauma. And you can see how this is very complicated and very difficult for people because if I sequester that trauma out of my normal everyday self state, and then there's something that happens that triggers it, I can instantly be back in that trauma mindset and be doing things sexually that my normal mind would never choose to do.
Where did this come from? Why am I thinking about this right now? Those kind of questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So trauma does play a role in a lot of our unwanted sexual behavior. But again, if you don't have if you're attracted to the same sex and you want it, then it's not unwanted to you.
That's right.
And
And it's not
we're
a
not really
struggle.
addressing that.
Yeah. And so we're glad that you're here to connect with us and be friends. And there are many friends in our community who are they're not struggling, but they see the value of masculine connection where we can be real. So I'm here to answer the question, am I gay? In an empirical sense, Scott, I am not gay, but I have had a great exploration of this question because there were seasons in my struggle with my wife in my heterosexual relationship where I was like, man, wouldn't it be so much easier to be in a relationship with a guy right now? We could be, getting our rocks off together and having so much fun and comforting one another and just that would have been great. So I have wished I was gay for a season. Don't do that anymore. I'm not there. Great. I'm connected with my wife in our relationship now, and things couldn't be better. But the question is, was I gay? Am I gay? No. But there was a time when I thought I could be. So I definitely empathize with guys and have a lot of friends who live that lifestyle and are very dear to me. And so I'm very accepting of uh, everybody who wants to live gay or straight. I'm more concerned about whether or not you're interested in walking in a faithful dynamic than I am interested if you're walking in a gay or straight dynamic. That's my personal opinion. I'm all about the dependence upon a higher power. What was our definition of faith? Transcendence that impacts.
A sense of transcendent value and purpose, right? Not just
Yes.
living for the moment. And I also think, Chris, we would say we are for relational sexuality. We are not for impersonal, kind of transitory,
Transactional sexuality.
transactional sexuality, because we
Yeah.
don't believe that's flourishing for anybody.
Yes. So whatever that is for you that imparts a sense of deeper relationship and connection, uh, I'm definitely a fan of. So, guys, one of our questions that came across at the very end last Wednesday was, how do you find a therapist who talks about arousal templates or your story? Well, hello, we're here. We are addiction recovery coaches. We're not therapists, which is kind of like a twist in nomenclature. It's really not that different. In fact, in a sense, we can work in a more free way than a lot of therapists can because of state regulations. We counsel coach guys from all across the United States, from Australia, from Canada, from the UK, any English speaking country. We're happy to talk with you. Go to wegotballspod.com and sign up for a consultation with Scott or I. We'd love to talk to you more about how we can help you get into your story and dig deeper into these arousal dynamics and these family of origin dynamics that will make your life more clear and understandable. So you can also find our links to our retreats. We've got retreats and intensives coming up in the next 6 months that we want to really invite you to. If you've not done that, please do that. And if you're listening right now, smash that like button. I don't know, what is our like count up to on this episode so far? Let's see. I'm doing the quick refresh here. That's coming up
While
in
you're
just a
getting
second.
that, I just wanted to note it. No, I want it noted that William Webb says he knows you're not gay, but you are a wonderful gay icon. So you're like the Judy Garland of recovery help.
Here I am. I'm here for all you guys. Here for you men. So
Now, I promised I would give some books, some recommended reading.
yeah,
So
give some of those.
let me do that. One of the best books I can recommend is Adam Young's book, Make Sense of Your Story. The second one I would recommend would be Jay Stringer's Unwanted.
Yes.
The third one, which is going to be more specific to sexual abuse, is Dan Allender's Healing the Wounded Heart. And then just some general books. General trauma books would be The Body Keeps the Score by
Now skip that
Basil
one.
Vanderbilt.
What happened to you? What happened to you by Oprah Winfrey and
What Happened to You by Oprah Winfrey and Bruce Perry. And then the other one, if you really want to get into the weeds, would be Dan Siegel's The Developing Mind, because it's about development. And they talk a lot about how the mind forms and some sexuality as well, but how the effect of trauma interrupts specific brain processes and the development in our nervous system. So those are really good books to kind of get a foundation for understanding how what happened to you really explains a lot about how you are today, which is really what we're talking about.
Oh, not Oprah, PC1 says. Oprah did a great job in that book. In fact, I would recommend the audio book of What Happened to You, because there's a lot of great conversations that they put in print in the actual book, but the audio book is a long conversation between her and Bruce Perry with Oprah telling her story. So I think it was really good. I loved it. I listen to it once a year. So.
And I see Psycho Bible, our friend Andrew is on. Andrew's going to be on the podcast in a couple of weeks, where he is going to talk about some really interesting research that was done at UCLA on how arousal templates do change through different therapeutic modalities. So he's going to be upcoming. I'm glad you're here, Andrew. But what else? We're about done. We're about out of time.
Yeah, wrap it up, buddy.
So, guys, thanks for being with us. Thanks for all the great interaction in the chat. It was great for Sutton to be here and all of our favorite guys. And hopefully this was a energizing conversation, gave you some things to think about, maybe more exploring of your story, that's the work we do. And we want to invite you to that, whether you do that with us or you do that with one of Kurt Thompson's confessional communities or any kind of story coaches that are out there. You can find other story coaches on the Allender Center website, but we're here for you as well. Chris and I run multiple story groups a week, and we also work with guys individually and then the retreats. So we hope you join us for any of those things where you'd like to get more curious about how you became who you became. So,
and that's what we do every Wednesday and Friday, 12 Central, right here on We Got Balls.
And you do too.
See you soon, everybody.